Welcome to another one of our interview series. My name is Stephanie Dobson, and I'm the founder, CEO, and content creator for Up a Notch Learning, Inc. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have with us Diana Martinez, who's an attorney and mediator practicing in Southern California, whose practice is 100% based on out-of-court settlement-based resolution. Welcome, Diana.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So in every separation, the divorce professional should be looking at whether there's imbalances of power that exist between spouses or co-parents. In today's segment, we'll be discussing what that means and why it's important. It's our hope to have our viewers identify whether such a thing exists, and if so, what to do about it. So let's get started, Diana. So we'll start by having you explain to our viewers what it's meant by power imbalance in the context of a family who's separating or divorcing.
So, what we refer to when we're talking about power imbalances, it can be anything from just method of communication. It can be financial knowledge and awareness or control management. It can be management or control of the family. So, when we talk about that, the way it shows up sometimes is you have one spouse or partner who dominates the conversation, literally does it interrupts when someone else is talking, doesn't permit the other spouse or partner to speak or speaks for the other person. So that's the communication imbalance. Most often we'll see financial powers of imbalance where you have one spouse exclusively who has managed throughout, or partner who's managed throughout the relationship, the finances for the family. That's very common. And then you have the other spouse or partner who's really focused more on the family. So most people will talk about the financial power imbalance. And they forget that there's also a unity between children and whoever's been the primary caregiver, oftentimes. So there can be power imbalances even when the issue isn't as sexy or as interesting to one or the other.
And why, what's the importance of trying to determine when you're separating or divorcing whether there's a power imbalance?
Well, you need to identify it in order to be able to address what the potential solutions might be. What are the obstacles to getting to a solution? If we go with what people most often will talk about, financial power of imbalance, you might have a situation where the person who wasn't as engaged or as involved in financial matters during the union, um, they may just be saying no to very reasonable options for solution, not because they disagree, but because they don't understand it. You can have somebody who is the higher income earner who thinks, well, this is supported by law and this makes sense, and the other person will have enough money. But when you're saying, let's say they bring in 80% of the income, the other person brings in 20%, doing a 50-50 equal share of things like orthodontics, like anything that's not covered by the children's health insurance, that may not exactly be true equal when you consider how the income is divided, or is allocated. So you can't really start talking solutions until you understand what your budget is, what you're going to need, what's truly available. What does it mean for the stock options to be non-vested? You can't really get to yes. I can tell you right now, hey, sight unseen, I will sell you a brand new Mercedes Benz, 25,000. You mail me the money and I'll send you the car. For all you know, it's a matchbox. Okay, you have to have an understanding, and that applies to any imbalance, whether it's children, whether it's communication, whether it's financial.
And it sounds like, from what you're saying, that it doesn't necessarily mean that the imbalance is insurmountable. that
Right.
just because you start out with this imbalance of, for example, of financial knowledge, that's part of the transparency of the divorce process. Is before you can get to yes on every topic, whether you've got 5 things to resolve or 85 things to resolve, what we
Yep.
need to do is to make sure that by the end of it, both of you have that transparency and that balance does exist. So part of it is identifying it for the purpose of making sure that in order to get to yes, we have that balance achieved.
Right. And when it comes especially to personalities, when you have a more dominant personality and you try to go in and get things resolved, bing, bang, boom, it doesn't always work out well. And I'm bringing back to memory a couple who came in, and it was that kind of thing. In that case, the husband was the communicator for the two. The husband is the one who made all the decisions, and literally during that first meeting, the wife just sat there with her arms crossed, wouldn't even look. Anytime she would try to say something, he would interrupt and say, "Oh, what she means is." And so I told them, you have, not in these words, but I helped them identify, you have a pattern of communication that is incredibly imbalanced. Not bad or good, it's just not balanced. Maybe husband speaks because wife won't. Maybe wife won't speak because husband does. I don't know what the root is. So my recommendation was to have them work with a mental health professional on communication, not to fix the marriage, but on communication, so that we could then start having those financial discussions, those legal discussions, and discussions about the family. They had, I want to say they did like 7 sessions, individual and joint. It was a combination. And when they came back, they were continue to work with him, with the mental health professional, but they wanted to get the legal side moving as well at that point. And it was as if I was meeting with a totally different
Mhm.
couple. It was she was much more engaged. He would stop himself and say, why don't you take that one? Or I'd like to know your thoughts first, and kind of give her that opportunity. So he was a lot more aware.
Mhm, mhm. And when families are separating, how do they identify if this imbalance exists? You're talking about as a professional, you can help them to identify that. But are there ways? Can you give our viewers some tips on how to figure out whether that imbalance does exist?
Well, if you take a look at things, let's shift from financial, because that one's kind of an easy one, and let's shift to family. Who is the one who is primarily aware of the children's events at school? Who knows the teachers? Who knows what the children are allergic to? I had a case where one parent was fighting for 50-50 time, had never raised young children. It was always the other parent, and was demanding this. And the complaint I got from the parent who was primarily in charge of the children was, the other parent doesn't even know what they're allergic to. Because there was an incident, they were given the child was prescribed some antibiotic, and that parent with whom the child was at the time of the incident texts the other and says, I seem to remember they were allergic to some kind of antibiotic. And that's when I got the call. The other parent doesn't even know. So that's how you identify an imbalance a lot of times when it comes to children. Who has been the primary caregiver? To whom are the children primarily connected? It's a lot of times it is the mom, but we do have a lot of cases where we have stay-at-home fathers. So it's not gender specific, it's where the relations, and you can even have siblings where one is much closer to the other parent, and there's an imbalance there, even between the siblings. On a financial level, it's no longer an excuse to say, well, I've never balanced a checkbook, so I don't, I just don't know how, or I'm not tech savvy, and everything requires me to create an account online. You know what? Put away the excuses. Time to put the big boy, big girl pants on And you have to now take the approach of becoming the CEO of your life and the CFO of your life. There's no more excuses. So, what does that mean? You should have copies of your tax returns. Okay. If you don't, reach out to the preparer, they'll have copies. You can request copies from the IRS, from your state franchise tax board. You can get access. Fine, you're not tech savvy. Go to your bank and
Mhm.
request copies of your statements. If you are not listed on your accounts, make note of the accounts you're aware of, and you're going to need a professional to help you get those copies. Or,
Mhm.
maybe you just ask for them and see if the person who is in charge of the finances will just hand them over. Sometimes that's a trigger because now what they control, they feel like they're losing that control. And that goes for parents who've been primarily in charge of the children as well. Now someone's kind of invading their domain. So there's a lot of fear that's attached to it. But there are things you can definitely do to start mitigating, start neutralizing that imbalance.
Mhm. Now, if we were to talk on the safety side of power imbalances, so just a little bit different than the finances and the parenting, what would you say that parents or spouses who are separating need to look out for when there is a possibility of some safety power imbalances?
Yeah, so I don't get a whole lot of those because they don't tend to look for out of court solutions because typically there's restraining orders and they're going the contested litigation route. Doesn't mean I haven't had those issues come up. There are times when, and in fact I have one right now, you have one spouse or partner who thinks they can just bully their way through. You have a pattern with that person. And so it's going to be really hard to break those habits. And it could even put you in danger if you try to. So you definitely want to make sure you have, I always tell people, have a safety plan. So real basic is the people who are around you normally. And sometimes in these situations, the person who is supposedly the aggressor, the alleged aggressor, um, isolates the other person from family. So if you do happen to have contacts, that's the first place to reach out. I actually had a family member of my husband who's in that situation, and what we set up, they had a young baby, and what we set up is I would call her every night. And if she told me, yeah, the baby's up to 7 ounces, that was my cue to contact the police immediately and have them go to her home. So you can have a safety plan. Just be sure you know also where the police stations are near where you frequent, whether it's work or home or wherever. And then you want to make sure that you're talking with a mental health professional. If you can get the other person to also have a mental health professional, that's bonus. That's great.
Mhm.
But the reality of a safety imbalance is you may have to have meetings at the courthouse where there are metal detectors. And I've done that. I actually had a mediation where we all met in the courthouse because we had to go through the metal detectors. And in that case, the mental health professional, the family specialist who was on a co-mediation, we had another professional mediator with us. It was a former Vietnam veteran, chopper evac pilot, so he was well trained in physical altercations if we needed some help. So there are, in that situation, you definitely want to engage professionals to help you.
Mhm. And we've been talking throughout today's episode about various processes. And we started the interview by talking about how your focus in your practice is on out of court solutions. And uh, you've been making references to having meetings and being in person with both parties present and recognizing power imbalances. Now, we know that there's lots of negotiation options that or various negotiation options that families have as they're going through separation, things like divorce mediation, collaborative divorce, divorce litigation. There's even sometimes the kitchen table option, arbitration. There's the various options. So as families are looking to these various negotiation processes, what it sounds like that from what we've already talked about, is some imbalances may be okay to still use these out of court processes because where there's ways to get through them, and others maybe we need to look at a different route for safety concerns or otherwise. Can you speak a little bit to the different imbalances and those process options and how they intertwine as you're speaking with your clients or potential clients as you're interviewing them to figure out what process might be best for them?
Well, it's all based on degrees. So if there's such an imbalance of, let's say, management of the family, that the parent who was primarily in charge of taking care of the kids takes the kids and leaves the home and does not tell the other parent where they are, you're going to need to litigate. You absolutely need to get the court involved to be able to regain access. And that is a time sensitive issue, because as long as those children are away from that parent, that impacts the relationship. It could end up resulting in parental alienation. I mean, there's so many things that could go wrong. So that's a situation where before you consider mediation or collaboration, you need to make sure that you know your children are safe
Mhm.
and that you have access to them. Um, Obviously, unless you've done something to harm the children, then that might be a different situation. Um, but we're talking all things being equal. If it's a financial extreme, someone emptied the bank accounts and shut down all the credit cards, and you literally have no access to support yourself. Again, or they're liquidating assets. They're selling off stocks and selling the home right out from under you. You need to get a court involved to stop the behavior. Um, those kind of extremes, I would not recommend. If somebody came to me and told me that, I would not recommend mediation or collaboration at that point in time. Once that is neutralized, if
Mhm.
there is an option and if it's safe to do so, then yeah, let's explore what might be needed. If you have, again, somebody who is not well versed, and I have had those cases where one spouse or partner, they've never even balanced a checkbook. I have one that's never even used an ATM machine. So you've got to recognize where the imbalance is and find the right professional for that. As an attorney, I tend to be the most expensive part of a process. Um, Financial professionals tend to charge less per hour, and they tend to be the expert in that
Mhm.
particular field. So that's when I will often recommend someone for communication or for the family, or for the financial education piece. So it's not me. I know enough. I have children. I know enough about how it impacts family law cases, and I've been called a closet therapist many times, which I love. Love that sometimes people go into a room and they can't tell that I'm the lawyer, because I don't give off that aggression that people associate with lawyers. Not all lawyers are like that. Um, but if you get the right person who's properly trained in both mediation as well as that particular field, whether it's financial or mental health, um, it's going to go much further in either preparing you and your spouse, your partner, to be successful in that process, or being able to highlight and identify if you are not able to prepare for that process. Because everybody starts at extremes, everybody starts high conflict. There's no way we can resolve. If that were true, I wouldn't have a practice. You wouldn't have a practice. If you are both willing to transition, willing to change your own behavior, you have those options available for sure.
One of the things I think our viewers will find helpful, in particular, when we talk about isolating even the potential financial power imbalances, what you're describing is there's some power imbalances, even say on the financial side, that are able to be overcome because you're still able to dissolve that imbalance and get to more equality. And there's some financial imbalances that relate to control and that are going to be detrimental and may need court intervention to stop, as you said, to stop that behavior from, whether it's selling things or draining accounts or
Yes.
those sorts of things. And so each imbalance is first to identify that imbalance and then to figure out if that is surmountable or insurmountable in your particular case. And then speaking with your lawyer about what the appropriate negotiation processes for your family based on those imbalances or balances.
Right. And finding the professionals that can help you neutralize them, because not,
Mhm.
there are some mediators out there, lawyer mediators, who take a very hands-off approach. What can we agree on? I was settlement counsel on a case. It was very high conflict, and the mediator walked into the room. First off, didn't even ask if there was any issue with being in the same room, and in this particular case, there was. Walks into the room and says, "So, what can we agree on? I've got a flight in 3 hours, so we need to get this done." I'm thinking, wow, I'm working way too hard because there's a lot of prep work that goes into it. But yeah, you have to find the right profession.
Mhm. Well, my very favorite part of every interview is our top 3 tips. So let's hear it from you. What are your top 3 tips for families where they've identified that a power imbalance exists for them?
The first one is stop making excuses. Everything. Okay. If you're divorcing, there's some kind of power imbalance. And if everything was neutral and going well, communication, emotions, money, children, you wouldn't be getting a divorce. So recognize that there's going to be some level on both sides. So stop making excuses. It's time to grow up, become the CFO, CEO of your own life, and start with research. Do your research. If it's on family, show your kids that you're interested. Go to the events. Know who their coaches and teachers are. Know who their friends are. Know what their events are. It is no longer your spouse or partner's duty to notify you of upcoming events. They're not your secretary. Okay, so get
Mhm.
over that part to begin with. Take control and start educating yourself. If it's on financial, get copies of your tax returns. Find out who your
Mhm.
tax preparer is. Where do you bank? You can go online and see if my spouse works for General Electric or for Tesla or for Starbucks, what kind of retirement plans do they have? You can actually go online and see the benefits packages. So stop making excuses and do your research is number one. Number two, find the right professional to start neutralizing that imbalance, whether it's communication, whether it's money, whatever it is. If you weren't able to productively communicate before you started a divorce or separation, I know this is going to come as a huge shock to a lot of people. It doesn't get better after you start the divorce or separation. Okay. And a lot of people are in denial about that. So, yeah, if you couldn't do it without a facilitator before, it's not going to get easier after. So, find the right professional, whether it's mental health, financial, legal, tax, estate planning, whatever it is that you're questioning, find the right professional, and they should be trained in collaborative and mediation processes. And finally,
Before you go on to the third one, I just want to remark one thing that I think is really important that you identified is one of the things at Up a Notch Learning that we focus on is people being informed and making informed choices. So staying in the driver's seat about, for example, what negotiation process they use, who they choose as a professional, and not just choosing the first person in the phone book or the person that's the least expensive or or you think that getting the person that's the most expensive means they're the best or
right.
the person who's first available. With respect to things like power imbalances or imbalances generally, I hope that our viewers take away from this episode and interview is that those should be things that the professional that you choose is actually looking for to help to neutralize, because there are some professionals out there who don't even recognize that power imbalances or imbalances generally should be neutralized. And so that's a real key when you're choosing someone, to be able to talk to them about, I really don't know a lot about the finances. What do you think about that? Or I'm not really very involved with my children right now. What should I do? Those kind of questions should be really posed of your lawyer or your other professionals that you're hiring.
Yeah. And don't expect one professional to do it all.
Mhm.
That's the thing. We have our wheelhouse of expertise, and you're setting yourself up for disappointment if you want your lawyer to also be the communication neutralizer, be also the financial neutralizer, be also the family neutralizer. There are
Mhm.
some of us who can do it, but you're asking a lot of one person at the highest rate on the team, the highest hourly rate. So
Mhm.
the last one was really be open and transparent and be realistic. We're not going to change people. Okay. There is no magic pill that you take, and all of a sudden, your spouse or partner is the person you were hoping them to be. Expect that that imbalance will always exist to some level if you're going to rely on the other person to neutralize it for you, on your spouse or partner to neutralize it for it. It's time for you to take that control. And what I tell people is you need to be open to changing your ways. If that means dropping the excuses and now you are in charge of balancing the checking account. And we've done that in some of our cases is we'll have the person who never had to pay the mortgage, who never had to do the taxes, who never had to do that, they start taking on small items. Obviously, we don't want anything to fall into default, so we're watching over that. But there are small steps that you can take to start testing the water. Um, think about what you can do. You can only be responsible for your own behavior. What can you do to start creating some balance? And yes, maybe your spouse was always the one who put on the family calendar, little Ricky has band practice on Wednesdays and on Fridays. That is no longer going to be their job. That is your job. You are a parent. You are a full time parent,
Mhm.
whether they're with the other parent half the time, but you are always a parent. And so take that seriously. Take
I
responsibility is really the point of it. So be open to changing your realistic that the other person may never
Mhm.
change.
I always call it being a 100% parent. So, irrespective of the amount of time that you spend with your child or children, it's the quality over the quantity, and you're both 100% parents.
Yeah, my children are 19, they'll be 20 this year. They were away at college and then COVID hit. Um, but now one is up visiting a friend in San Jose, and he'll be there for a couple of weeks. And I'm still a parent. I'm still making sure that, we made sure before he left, he did his taxes, and we made sure that, he knows how to take care of himself. And if he needs us, we're here. You're always, whether the relationship between the parents is changing to one of separate households, or if they're divorcing, whatever it is, yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. You are still 100% parent.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much, Diana, for joining us today. And I know that our viewers will really feel a sense of empowerment by learning and understanding what we were talking about today. So, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks. I hope it was helpful.